Hello, today is the 3rd May. So we are having MicroProfile technical call. So if you haven't added your name to the minutes contributor, please do so. So basically, it's for today. So it's we are going to discuss more on the releases. So for the releases, as I promised, last week and also the week before last week. And then I cannot write a kind of summary on what we have been discussing and all the options we have. And I think is Roberto and I had shared some thought on this. But let's go through them and then discuss here. Hopefully today we can kind of sort of make some consensus if we can, because time is running out. Are there any questions before we dig into it? Okay, so it's basically I think is last time we talked a lot about when to move up Java compilation version to Java 11 for the MicroProfile stacks. We discussed on and off quite a few calls. Also is offline. We had an offline conversation on, another thread here. She shared the thread, and then there's more people jumped in to share their kind of the thoughts. So basically, it's kind of I think the consensus is we're going to move up to Java 11 when we align with Jakarta E10. Are there any different thought or objections? Okay, if not, let's move on. So this will be just, it's resolved. So basically I think is afterwards, I think I will create a document this in the kind of wiki so that I can point people to the conversations. So that we don't just have the conversation, so repeatable conversation under this conversation.
Yeah, sorry. So
yeah,
Emily, so the assumption here is that Java 8 bytecode compilation will still allow MicroProfile to run on app servers that are running on Java 11, right? We're just relying on bytecode and compatibility. Okay, yep.
Yeah, so currently is Java 8 and onwards. Yeah. Okay, so the second one is kind of our release, the upcoming release. Now is May. I don't think we can do the June release as proposed, because we haven't got any even release plan in place. So now is kind of the first thing is first thing is kind of when the next release. So should we do the October release, or should we just saying, okay, let's do as much as we can and do a release? So it's
well, if we shift to July, because our release plan still says that we plan on 3 releases this year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it comes down to the compatible implementation to some degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, if we were to try and do something for July, what would that mean in terms of a compatible implementation?
Yeah. So let's say, let's do the next release, maybe it's July. The first thing is what should be in the July release. So at the moment, there's a couple of suggestions. So is the first suggestion we discussed at a great length, in the last technical call, is basically we're saying, okay, so we include the JWT 2.1, OpenAPI 3.1, and we still have open tracing. However, we are going to add telemetry I think is a kind of I have a concern, even though it's kind of, we say, okay, the open tracing is kind of on by default, telemetry is disabled by default. So however, like the application code, they can still access the API for the for the open telemetry or MicroProfile directly telemetry brought in. However, at runtime, is might not work if they have not enabled it. The other thing is when they enable this, they have to disable the open tracing. And also the other thing is the complication is need to make sure the REST client and works with, if they kind of put a switch on, and should work with both. And if they have a configure differently, a different piece will come into play. So I think is yeah, it's kind of quite complicated. So anyway, let me just quickly go through the other suggestion, which is the MicroProfile. If we say in July, actually, let's be bold. Let's just because MicroProfile, we kind of is less less concerned with like a backward incompatible change when compared to Jakarta EE. That's directly saying, okay, remove the open tracing from platform and make it a standalone, directly add a telemetry 1.0. At the same time, also because it's a major release, and we can add the metrics 5.0. So in this way, this is a big kind of the release, is a worthwhile release. So it's less complication. So it's kind of the, so that's kind of the other suggestion. So I think Roberto commented is fine with this one, Jakarta EE, and also yeah, Roberto also comment like directly move open tracing outside the platform and etc. And then let's stop right here for these options. And the third question is when to align with the Jakarta EE10. So with that, anybody want to share their views on this on this scope?
Well, I'm okay with option A2 as long as we do align with Jakarta EE10. You know, we won't be able to help on any of the compatible implementations to get that release out the door.
Right.
You know, the simple perspective is we're not going to be able to remove any specifications in our major versions, you know, in the patch releases until the next major version on our implementation side. So it doesn't really matter what we do on the MicroProfile side. If we released A1, it doesn't preclude us from releasing A2 shortly after. You know, it just depends. It's up to everybody who is going to be contributing some of these compatible implementations to kind of give some indication on what's okay with you guys. You know, if we did A2, we would try to work that into our existing stuff in our roadmap. If we did A1, we would try to work it into what we have released already. If we did A2, we would wait for the next major release.
Yeah, the only thing is the kind of A1 is a kind of quite I think is quite complicated. I mean from end user point of view, the kind of the API you can compile okay, but at runtime is the kind of work.
I mean, personally, I don't think it's any more or less work because these things need to be enableable and disableable anyway.
So I think I also will worry about the integration. integration, like with a REST client, for example. So when you have the switch, you need to like, if you switch off the open telemetry and then switch on the open tracing, and then it's a kind of REST client work with open tracing. Basically, it's, and then it's the REST client I need to figure out, okay, do you have an open tracing on or you have a telemetry on? And then it's also the, yeah. So I think is kind of the safer approach is this one. However, if we say, okay, if we align with EE10, I don't think we are going to kind of, if we say release in July, because EE10 will be out in June, I don't think Open Liberty will say, okay, we will just, yeah, is do the EE10 alignment. If this is grow, if the like without align with the EE10, I think will be up for the compatible implementation. Yeah, John, go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry, yeah, just had my hand raised. So thinking about this, you know, historically we've had releases, right, 3 times per year, February, June, and October, and summer release was always the major release. We haven't been able to hit that for a while because of, you know, there's been a lot happening in the Jakarta world and the MicroProfile world and the working group world, right, that kind of precluded us from doing that. So I think if we, at least for the time being, pause that historical approach, and if we could do, right, we've already had one, then we have a release, maybe it's even August, right, or whenever we think we can get a 6.0 out with a compatible implementation, and then maybe target an incremental update in December, right? That still keeps our cadence for the calendar year. Now, it probably blows February out of the water, but that's okay, I think. So that's my thoughts, at least on the timing and release aspect. I don't know what others people think about that, but
well, yeah,
it keeps things moving.
I think that we're going to realize in this conversation that the timeline for an A2 option is the same, regardless of whether or not we take the option for an A1 in the middle.
What do you mean?
I mean that because we would want to align the A2 option with EE10, and that pushes the timeline out to not be June or July, most likely, then I think we're all going to magically settle on that we want the A2 option to happen, but we won't be able to control when it happens necessarily. It's going to be later in the year, whether we like it or not. And then so that basically is going to kind of shift the conversation into a zone where do we want to take the A1 option between now and then?
I think, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
Go
ahead.
I was just going to briefly add to that. It's like, well, that's interesting. I wonder how many people would implement a 5.1 or just versus just wait for 6.0.
Yeah, I wanted to discuss this, right? Because we can go over here and say, yes, let's do this release, let's do that other release, but then if there is no interest in implementing it, then there is no point. So on our perspective, from a Red Hat side, we are working on Wildfly and Quarkus to move it to Jakarta 10. So my main concern right now is it is likely that MicroProfile 5 will work with Jakarta 10, but no one tried that out yet. So that's why
that's not true.
I mean, at least from my knowledge.
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. Yes, with the Jakarta namespace, yes, but Jakarta E10 specifically, no. Exactly.
So it is likely it will work out of the box, but no one can be 100% sure. So that's why I will prefer to move the work to make sure that we have a release that aligns with Jakarta 10. So implementers that are moving to Jakarta 10 can have a MicroProfile version that we know that works with Jakarta 10 and don't have to use a Jakarta 9 that may or may not work. Again, it is likely it will work. I don't see a reason why it shouldn't. But if there are any problems, then we'll have to do a release to align anyway to fix those problems or figure out some other way to do it. But at least that's the situation, and we don't really want to go back and retrofit MicroProfile 5.1 on an old product release while we're already moving to 10.
That's fair feedback.
My concern is if is kind of there's a bigger uplifting to align with Jakarta 10, so that will push this release even further. So I was kind of I kind of thinking, if we release 6.0 with the current with this one, but and then we can release one shortly afterwards, just have the change with the Jakarta E10 alignment. So at the same time, we could making the parallel progress. We could release like a 6.0, and then it's kind of very soon. I mean, maybe even in like October, November time, we release 7.0. So I think it's the other thing, even though we say, oh, 2 major releases, I think that's just a number game. Or Yan, raise your hand. Sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah, but Edwin was first, right?
Oh, Edwin, go ahead.
Yeah, I just didn't see the raise hand before, but I just want to add, of course, we can split releases and maybe do a 6 and 7. They also have to be adopted, right? So, yeah, really creating extra releases might be doable from my profile perspective, but like David and Roberto have been talking about, we also have to adopt them. So what is best for both the MicroProfile releases and how they are adopted?
I would just say that from our perspective, if 6.0 came out and it was basically didn't focus, you know, we would go to the, you know, we're much like Roberto's situation, where we would probably focus our effort on the release that aligns with Jakarta E10 because that's our next major version. We wouldn't be interested in any breaking changes on our stable products. And so, you know, we would just naturally gravitate towards the version that aligned with Jakarta E10.
Yeah, I think that's fine for the like the runtime, because they don't have to just certify against each one in sequence. Yeah.
Right. Well, that means that if 6.0 came out and it was a breaking change over 5, we would have, and 7.0 was the version that would came out that's intending to align with Jakarta E10, we would skip 6.0 entirely.
Yeah, makes sense.
So
well, I'll probably make an easier question, right?
Can we give
the one?
So sorry, Roberto, can we give Yan and Michael chance, because they have their hands up for a long time? Sorry. Yan,
Thanks.
you are first. You are next.
Yeah, I would say doing unnecessary multiple breaking changes and major releases, having a 6.0 and in the same year 7.0, that would not be adopted, or at least at minimum disliked by the users, because they have major migration projects, and you can plan that, and you can tell your boss that you have to do it, and you have benefits when you do it sooner than later, but you cannot do that too often. And even if the changes are smaller than in each major release, we should not do that releasing within a half year cadence 2 major releases. I would say if there is no adoption by the manufacturers or the vendors of the platform and on the user side, then we should skip a release. But if there's a demand on the user or vendor side, which should reflect the user side, then we even could release 5.1 and 6.0 at the same day if there is support for doing these releases. So I would suggest to head for 6.0. If there is a manufacturer who would like to build a 5.1, then we can go for that and support that too. But if there is no demand, we shouldn't do it. And then a 6.0 that comes little bit later, but is aligned with the Jakarta EE10, the Java SE dependence resulting from that, and is in sync, would make sense. As we discussed 2 weeks ago, even when it's possible to combine MicroProfile 5.0 with Jakarta EE10 specifications or the other way around, there might be unexpected breaking user applications that use more than the features of the Jakarta EE dependencies from the MicroProfile perspective.
Okay, thanks. Michael, you are next.
Okay, well, a couple of things, just as I'm listening to everything. And of course, I'm not, involved with the vendor with compatible implementations, but I wanted to make a couple comments. 5.1, I kind of like the idea of having open telemetry being deprecated and the ability for developers to use telemetry in their application, even though it says in the document that it's disabled, which I assume to be that it's not, you have to add it explicitly. But, and then also there's, 5.0, there was updates to all the core APIs. And then, I don't know if 2, 3, and 4 were like that, but, and then related to the 4 APIs that are from Jakarta EE, CDI, JSON-P, JSON-B, and JAX-RS. I assume the alignment would be for Jakarta EE10 with those, relevant versions, the Jakarta EE10. So is it possible for MicroProfile 6 to use the Jakarta EE10 APIs, and then maybe a 5.1 to use the Jakarta EE 9.1? I don't know, just kind of throwing that out there. So it's kind of a, I'm throwing a lot out there, but for discussion. But that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Okay, thank you. Okay, back to you, Roberto.
Yeah, what I want, there are 2 things that I want to mention. So one is the easy question right now is, who's here is able or wants to implement the 5.1 version or implementation? So I can say straight off the bat that on our side, we're not interested in implementing a 5.1 for the reasons I already stated. Second, and I was forgetting when I was mentioning that earlier, we just have like a few pull requests on MicroProfile config because the TCK has some issues. It's not running on Jakarta 10. So the API is not the issue, but it just means that most likely you're going to have to adjust MicroProfile to be able to run it properly on E10, because as is, and without some of the pull requests that were sent, and that was just for config. I'm not sure about the other implementations or specs. I mean, the TCKs are not going to be able to run, or at least not all of them. So that means that we have work to consider and to be done for alignment, so for 10. And so for servers or for runtimes that are already moving to 10, they're not going to be able to run MicroProfile properly.
Does that, so agree with all that. And just to recap one of the things that you said is, you know, what I mentioned in the start of my perspective was that we would all gravitate towards the A2, aka MicroProfile 6.0, and it would basically be coming down to a question if we wanted to do a release. We don't necessarily need to want to do a release. But your comment about needing fixes in the config TCK, I wonder if maybe that is something that we would want to do between now and 6.0, basically clear out any issues that we're spotting as service releases, or perhaps point releases. They don't necessarily come with new features for users, aka not more stuff for us to implement, but you know, we could potentially be fixing TCKs as these issues are discovered, and then when we do the 6.0, it's a lot easier. You know what I mean? Like basically just, like, what if we don't wait to fix these
Oh, sure,
issues?
I agree. I mean, that was what was done with the PR that was submitted, right? So some matters on the Wi-Fi team and the CDI team just discovered this and make a couple of changes to make the TCK to run on CDI 3 and CDI 4. Some of the tests were not running on CDI 4. So he makes some changes to make it compatible between both, right? But that's just a proof that we are not ready for 10, right?
Right. I think I'm agreeing with that. I was just wondering if maybe it's something we should be discussing, that there would maybe potentially be a 5.1 to address these types of issues, but it doesn't contain telemetry, doesn't contain any user bells and whistles, no features, no new things for vendors to implement, but we are fixing these small issues so that way we don't have so much work to do for 6.
That sounds reasonable.
So it's a basically, yeah, so I was aware of these TCK issues. So the main issue is about empty bins XML. So it's basically in the MicroProfile TCK. I think a lot of spec Matt already got away. I mean, didn't use the empty bins XML. So that's the only that's an issue. I mean, Marty is trying to fix. If TCK use empty bins XML in the CDS3, that means all Java classes are being in CDI4 means only annotated are CDI bins. So that's the kind of the one of the fix. So that doesn't warranty a MicroProfile 5.1 release. We could do a kind of, if you want to kind of do a service release, because when you add basically the fix is to annotate I mean the Java classes with the bin defining annotations that work with both the CDS3 and the CDI4. So it's not many changes. So it's a kind of I think is a Marty. I don't know whether he has gone through all of the MicroProfile specs yet, but yeah, definitely I think that can be fixed, and if any spec want to do a service release, just go ahead, because there's no functional updates whatsoever. Sorry, and a couple of people raised their hands. Yeah, go ahead to take it away. Let me see.
Yeah, I think, yeah, a service release or a patch release, a 5.0.1, for example, that would make sense if only the TCK need to be clarified or need to be patched to run as intended. I wonder, it would be nice, even if we don't add other functionality, we still could fix the other issue in formally deprecating open tracing. without touching it from the technology aspect, but declaring that will be removed in the future.
Yeah, good point. By the way, just a small correction here. If we do like a service release, we don't normally do a platform service release. I think all the spec can go ahead to do the service release. I think the open tracing, yeah, we can do a open tracing service release, just deprecate this spec. I think that's kind of something nice to do.
I think we're stretching the def. Oh, sorry, Edwin had his hands up. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so we have done a few platform patch releases in the past, but it was not because we wanted it. So I don't think we should make that a habit. But if we are talking about a patch release, why not put the functional release and the proposal from Jen in as well, deprecating the open telemetry? Open tracing. No. So that would mean we have 2 releases this year. If we then go to 6 later this year, and if the vendors are okay with it, I think from a user perspective, it also makes sense. So you have a completely loaded release with new features first, and then a breaking that breaks everything, but all at once. So if that was the correct conclusion, that makes sense for me at least.
Can you say that again? I didn't quite understand.
Yeah. So if we have a release 5.1 with all the TCK and functional changes in it, with also the deprecation of open tracing, and then go for 6 later this year, where we have the Jakarta E10 alignment and switch of the telemetry spec. Would that make sense from a vendor perspective as well?
I think what makes sense for us, I think would just depend on what the functional changes were in 5.1, because I think, Roberto has stated that if there are new features being added, like I suspect even JWT 1.2 or 2.1 would be considered a new feature, and they might not want to implement it.
Exactly.
So I suspect if it was really just, fixes and deprecation, then that would be welcome. I did want to make, so I'm fine with fixes and deprecation and 6. Sounds like there's support for that on the Red Hat side. But I did want to make a comment about, us saying that we can change the way tests are written in a service release. I don't think that that's in the spirit of a service release. The test isn't flawed. It's not broken. It's just that in future versions, that annotation is necessary. And if we were to add that annotation, we're at the same time removing the tests that proved that it could work without the annotation, which is still valid.
So David, so let me give you the further explanation for the TCK change. So basically, it's some TCK use the empty beans XML to enable some injections. So empty beans XML, so there's 2 ways to enable injection. One is the kind of the add bin defining annotations. The other way is being lazy and just have empty beans XML. So basically the other way to enable injection. So with the first way, with bin defining annotations, so that's kind of was recommended best practices. We work with CDS3 and CDF4. For the empty beans XML, because CDF4 stay away from empty beans XML. So that's why it's no longer work with CDF4. So it's basically kind of that didn't change the meaning of the TCK, however, just using the best practices and to make the TCK work with both CDS3 and CDF4.
Right, but we would be removing the empty beans XML, and so therefore we're no longer testing that that path works.
Yeah, so basically we are not testing that like from MicroProfile or spec point of view, didn't actually trying to test empty beans XML. It's trying to test actually the kind of the config can be injected to a bin. So it's previously is the kind of the bin you can either make annotated with bin defining annotations, or being lazy just add the empty beans XML, make sure that so that would be enable that class to be a bin. So
Right,
it's,
but
yeah.
it's not a small difference, right? On one side, the bean that is receiving the injection is not annotated with the CDI annotation, and people may have code written like that.
Yeah,
And
they
then-
will definitely have a
Hold
code
on,
like
hold on.
that.
And then on the other side, the bean is now annotated with an annotation saying it is explicitly a CDI bean. And then we're only now we would only be testing that that scenario works. So we are removing a valid scenario. That's not really something you can do in a service release.
That's kind of remove the scenario. So basically it's the kind of the, which means the like the empty beans XML that change no longer work with upcoming versions.
I think you're focusing on the wrong thing. I'm referring to the Java class getting injected. On one side, it doesn't have an annotation for CDI, and on the other side, it does have an annotation for CDI. Forget how the path that enabled the class that didn't have an annotation to work. Forget that it's an empty bean in XML. It could be something else. But basically, the user code is changing from one scenario to the other. And there's going to be existing code out there that doesn't have CD annotations. You may expect that the config can be injected, and we would no longer be testing that that scenario works.
So
Yeah, I agree with Davis on that.
so let's take it from a different angle. So it's in like a fault tolerance TCKs, for example, we didn't use the beans XML, empty beans XML at all. So that kind of that we changed that in the previous release. So it's kind of all the tests will continue work with like all, both the CDS3 and the CDF4. I think even though the TCK was written with this way, but it was unintentional.
So I get concerned when we say that, oh, the TCKs will run and that's just fine. I mean, they don't. I mean, we just have on the first spec, the core spec, we have failures, right? When moving to 10. So no one right now has an environment that is able to run all the TCKs in a Jakarta 10 runtime and make sure that all of them passes. If you try to do it, it will fail right straight away on config 1. And even if we have this wishful thinking that all of the other TCKs will pass, we cannot be sure of that. The only certain that we have based on this evidence is a Jakarta 10 runtime is not able to certify and run the TCKs of MicroProfile. And I'm just counting with config, and that's all that requires, right? It will fail. And this is something that we need to fix. And we have to be able to run all the TCKs on a Jakarta 10 runtime to make sure that everything just runs just fine, and don't have this wishful thinking that they're going to be fine.
I don't think anybody doing wishful thinking.
I mean, it's just that on fault tolerance they will run, and I mean, I don't know. Yeah. No, we never run them on a Jakarta 10 runtime. They can run or they cannot run. I mean, we don't know. So
basically, I comment from the CDI point of view. So anyway, let's let's first figure out like if this is cannot be. I think it's since it's related to Jakarta E10. Let's just get all kind of fixed for Jakarta E10. If as I shown here, if we want to make a MicroProfile 6.0 to align with the Jakarta EE10, that's not, I mean, the whole scope will change. So all of the spec, like a config for tolerance health, so they have a Java version change, and these all need the major change. So basically the Java version change and et cetera, et cetera. So that's the bigger fix. So it's and then the thing is when do we want to do the MicroProfile 6.0? So it's which runtime is volunteer to do the like implemented like a Jakarta E10 already is also I mean volunteer to do all the stack update.
Yeah, so we did cover that, you know, if we want to say that you can run config on 11, there isn't any need for us to go and update it to say you can't use 8 anymore.
I think we already agreed to say update the Java like a source version to 11 when aligned with the Jakarta E10. So basically we will go through the like a MicroProfile config is in that compilation to be, sorry, change 8 to 11. So which means 11 won't be able to work with 8 anymore.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that we already discussed that just because we want to say, you know, the new MicroProfile base version is 11, 12, you know, 16, 17. We don't need to re-release specifications that aren't getting changed. Again, we don't need to release them again. We discussed that that's not necessary. They will work on the older.
I don't quite understand, David. How can you not release it when you change the POM from 8 to 11?
You don't need to do that. You just say that the MicroProfile platform version is now 17. All the previously released specs, if they work on 17 or 11, there's no changes necessary to them. They don't need to explicitly disallow 8 to make 11 enabled.
I think that's a different like a conversation we had last time. Okay, yeah, you had your hands raised.
Yeah, I think you asked the right question. Whichever release we try to build, a 5.0.1, a 5.1 or a 6.0, a compatible implementation at minimum 1 is needed. And if we skip 5.1 and heading for 6.0 as the next release, then we still need somebody to say, yeah, we will do that. And that answers the question when, when it is aligned to Jakarta EE10, that need to be done first by that implementation. And that could also, or as a potential candidate, to be a compatible implementation for MicroProfile 6.02.
So
Yeah.
what about the scenario?
At least one of the vendors need to say, yeah, we want to do that. And then it can be done really right after a release of Jakarta EE10. And I expect that will be at the end of Q2 this year, maybe at the beginning of Q3 this year.
So let me add something else into the mix, because I know that a lot of the vendors are doing pretty much the same thing, which was when they moved to Jakarta 9 on their servers, at least. I'm not sure if that's the true for everyone, but most of them were using the byte transformation code tool to transform all the stuff. Now for Jakarta 10, because the bytecode transformation doesn't work because there are API changes, you actually have to migrate the source code as well. right? So that's what we're doing in Quarkus and Wildfly. We're not going to use the bytecode transformation tool, just going to change the entire source code. Now, in my opinion, and that's why I probably think we probably need a new scenario, which is instead of making a release, we have the Jakarta 10 alignment plus changes. How about we have a release that only has the Jakarta 10 alignment? Because that will make way, way easier for us at our runtime to say, okay, we're moving to Jakarta 10. We're also moving to MicroProfile, whatever version that's aligned with Jakarta 10. And we don't have to worry about additional features that code changes, which could just going to complicate stuff. We're able to take that scenario if that's on the table.
So my suggestion is I would rather kind of do the MicroProfile stack changes before we do another release. Like we did a 5 release with nothing, I mean, no update whatsoever on MicroProfile. And then we did another 6.0 and then no update from MicroProfile. It's just like align with Jakarta E10. I don't feel that kind of send a good message. I would prefer if we have a 6.0, just do like have MicroProfile changes. So this is getting the priority right, will add some value. And then it's kind of we do another, like just having a kind of Jakarta E10 alignment. So which is what I mentioned here in the mailing list. So we could do a MicroProfile 7 to just align with Jakarta E10. So in this case, we just minimize the migration issue and also minimize the risk as well.
Yeah, but,
So
but you still haven't understood that until then, there's not going to be a runtime that's able to certify with the Jakarta 10 with MicroProfile, because MicroProfile cannot just run with Jakarta 10 at the moment. That's the issue.
So it's Liberty man. So there's the runtime, and
so you can certify Jakarta 10 with MicroProfile 5 or 6 without any fixes to the TCKs, you mean?
Because the Liberty were composable, so basically is Jakarta MicroProfile 6. We work with Jakarta E 9.1. So in our Liberty runtime, there's the kind of have E10 and also E 9.1. These
Okay,
are all
but that was not the question that I made. So because what you're doing is you're just using E9, not E10. What I'm saying
so that's
is
a
people that
requirement.
want to move to E10, they're not going to have a MicroProfile version that they can use.
No, when you go to E10, and then it's kind of the MicroProfile 7.0 will be there to like get the MicroProfile work with the E10. But I feel if you do a 5.0 align with 9.1, and then spend the whole year and and then do a immediately jump into E 9.0 E10 with the MicroProfile 6. So the people just say, okay, what's going on in MicroProfile? There's no movement actually. So I just worry about what message we are going to send.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I know, Jan, you had your hand up first, but I just wanted to call out that, we don't need to worry about the version numbers currently. If we did want to do a release to kind of fix TCK issues up, that I mentioned that earlier, that would be an option. Roberto proposed it as well just now, and so that kind of sounds like maybe that kind of thing might be needed. We don't have to call it 6. We could call it 5.1. But I do want to just state, I know it keeps getting brought up, having 6 and 7 come out within short succession. Under no circumstances would I support it. We can talk about it, but just know that for us, we wouldn't want to see like a 5 come out in December, 6 come out in June, and 7 come out in December again. It's just it's too much breaking change.
So if we do the
Sorry, I would like to add something to your discussion with Roberto. I think, Roberto, your problem from the vendor side and not from the specification side could be solved. The vendor could do multiple major releases. One major release to get rid of the transformer, for example, and another release to add other breaking changes independently of the MicroProfile release.
No, that's not the issue, right? So I can do all of that. What I'm saying, what I'm talking about, and forget versions, forget all the versions, right? So we're gonna have a Jakarta 10 release in a couple of weeks, and let's just say you'll have a runtime that runs Jakarta 10 like Wildfly, right? For that runtime, you not have a MicroProfile compatible release to run it with Jakarta 10. That's all. It doesn't matter if you're running source code, if you're running transformation code. There is simply no way currently to certify MicroProfile with the Jakarta 10 runtime because it just doesn't work.
we had a
Yeah, and then I understand that, right, we had that discussion 2 weeks ago. And yeah, that's a potential big problem that may face all the vendors who want to support Jakarta E and MicroProfile with one instance of a platform. Yes, sure.
So we had this is not a new problem. We had exactly the same thing with the Jakarta 9.1. It was Jakarta 9.1 was released early last year. I think it's only like December last year is the MicroProfile 5 was released. So that's not a new problem. So the other thing I want to say is if we do release a MicroProfile 6.0 without Jakarta E10 alignment, however, we could do the TCK changes here. Like in this release, we could do like do a config and also go through all the stacks and is kind of do the best effort. So basically, it's try out with the Jakarta E10, just a pre-work to see whether it's the kind of add any more changes. So in this way, we did a prep for the E10 alignment, and also we add some new functionalities from MicroProfile specs, so that we can talk about it. Otherwise, like the whole year, most of the year already, half a year. So we just had nothing new in the MicroProfile to talk about, except this alignment. So anyway, we have like 2 more minutes to spare. So where do we want to move next? So do we, kind of continue the discussion with the release offline again? I think it's better. We need to get this sorted as soon as possible. Shall we just take this offline and come up with the kind of the different variation and then continue the discussion in next week's live hangout? Is that okay with people? Okay, if no objections, John, do you think this can be the major talking point, major agenda for next week's live hangout?
I think John already left.
Oh, okay, didn't see it.
But yeah, let's discuss on the main list and get an update in the update call next week, or hopefully a conclusion.
Yeah, thank you, Edwin. Okay, so that's the top of our hour. So thank you for your comments and thoughts. Let's share on the meeting list. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Emily.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks, everyone. Great discussion today.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody.
Yes.
Thank you. Difficult choices.